Thanks to all who have joined us by WebEx for standing by. Welcome to the open meeting of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. During the meeting, you will be in listen-only mode. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and a recording is expected to be made available on the PCAOB's website. I'd now like to turn to Chair Williams to formally convene the meeting.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. This is an open meeting of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board on June 12, 2024. We welcome those of you who have joined us today by webcast or dialing into the teleconference. Before we proceed with the agenda, I will note for the record that all board members are participating in this meeting and we are able to hear one another. The first order of business before the board today is a staff recommendation that the board propose a new auditing standard, AS 2305, designing and performing substantive analytical procedures, together with other conforming amendments to PCAOB standards, to replace the PCAOB's existing auditing standard related to an auditor's use of substantive analytical procedures. To present the staff's recommendation, I will turn to our Chief Auditor, Barbara Vantage.
Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members Ho, Stein, Thompson, and Bodick. The Office of the Chief Auditor is pleased to recommend that the board issue a proposal on designing and performing substantive analytical procedures. Substantive analytical procedures involve comparing a recorded amount or an amount derived from a recorded amount to an expectation of that amount developed by the auditor to determine whether there is a misstatement. When appropriately designed and performed, substantive analytical procedures can provide relevant and reliable audit evidence when responding to an assessed risk of material misstatement. The proposed standard is designed to improve audit quality and to enhance investor protection by strengthening and clarifying requirements regarding designing and performing substantive analytical procedures in light of developments in audit practice and observations from PCAOB oversight activities. Currently, the auditor's responsibilities for designing and performing substantive analytical procedures are addressed in AS 2305, an interim standard adopted by the PCAOB in 2003. It predates advancements in technology and greater availability of information that we understand is influencing current practice, as well as requirements regarding risk assessment and audit evidence and board-issued standards. The proposal would be an important step in the board's continuing effort to modernize its standards. The proposal before you today also addresses risks specifically associated with the use of technology-assisted analysis in substantive analytical procedures, as well as more general risks that would arise if, as we expect, substantive analytical procedures become more prevalent because of the greater availability of information in electronic form and use of technology-based tools. In addition, the board's oversight of activities suggests that auditors do not always design and perform substantive analytical procedures appropriately. The proposed standard includes more explicit direction to auditors in areas identified through our oversight activities that would benefit audit quality. I would like to acknowledge the many people within the PCAOB who provided significant contributions to this project. First, I would like to thank my sincere appreciation to the team that led this project: Dima Andrienko, Dominika Taraskevich, Donna Silknitter, Sarah Madras, and Karen Wiedemann of the Office of the Chief Auditor. Additionally, I would like to thank our colleagues from other offices for their significant contributions, in particular Martin Schmalz, Eric Durbin, Carrie von Boos, and Dylan Rassier in the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, and Catherine Kelly, Jennifer Williams, and Katie Riley in the Office of General Counsel. I would also like to recognize the support provided by staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. And finally, I would like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff of the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and timely assistance with the project. This afternoon, Dominika Taraskevich and Donna Silknitter of the Office of the Chief Auditor will provide an overview of the proposal, and then Martin Schmalz and Carrie von Boos of the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis will provide some additional remarks, followed by our recommendation. Dominika?
Thanks, Barb. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. I'm going to highlight several of the key provisions of the proposed standard that are designed to strengthen and clarify the existing requirements for performing substantive analytical procedures. First, under the proposal, a substantive analytical procedure involves comparing the company's amount, which is a recorded amount or an amount derived from recorded amounts, to an expectation of that amount developed by the auditor to determine if there's a misstatement. The auditor's expectation is based on one or more plausible and predictable relationships among financial or non-financial data. The proposed standard strengthens and clarifies requirements related to the relationship on which the substantive analytical procedure is based. It would require the auditor to identify the relationship or relationships to be used in the procedure and, taking into account all relevant information of which the auditor is aware, determine whether each such relationship is sufficiently plausible and predictable. Under the proposal, this determination should extend beyond inquiry. The proposed requirement further provides that the relationships used in a substantive analytical procedure must be sufficiently plausible and predictable to achieve the objective of the procedure. These provisions focus the auditor on how information about the company's business and operations gleaned from risk assessment or other procedures could affect relationships used in a substantive analytical procedure. Second, while the proposed standard retains the existing requirements for the auditor to develop their expectation based on the identified relationship, a provision has been added to expressly address the risk of circular auditing. Circular auditing occurs when the auditor's expectation and the company's amount are derived from the same sources of information. The proposed standard makes clear that the auditor may not develop the expectation using the company's amount or information that is based on the company's amount. Next, the existing responsibilities related to establishing a threshold for evaluating the differences between the auditor's expectation and the company's amount have been strengthened and clarified. Specifically, under the proposed standard, the threshold is required to be set at or below tolerable misstatement, taking into account the nature of the account or disclosure. The proposed requirement acknowledges that setting the threshold below tolerable misstatement may be necessary to achieve the auditor's objective. Now I'd like to hand it over to Donna, who will discuss the remaining aspects of the proposed standard and related amendments to PCAOB standards.
Thank you, Dominica. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. The proposal clarifies the auditor's responsibilities when there is a difference between the auditor's expectation and the company's amount. Such a difference could indicate, for example, that the auditor did not consider pertinent facts when developing the expectation, or it could indicate a misstatement in the company's financial statements. The proposed standard would require the auditor to evaluate the difference between their expectation and the company's amount when the difference exceeds the established threshold and includes a more explicit requirement to perform procedures to determine whether there is a misstatement, and specifies that these procedures would be required to extend beyond inquiry. Further, the proposed standard specifies auditor responsibilities in other situations the auditor may encounter when evaluating a difference. This includes circumstances when the auditor is unable to determine whether there is a misstatement, and circumstances when the auditor identifies new relevant information of which the auditor was not aware when initially designing the procedure. Overall, the proposal more expressly integrates the proposed requirements with the existing PCAOB risk assessment standards, increasing the likelihood that auditors will properly design and perform substantive analytical procedures. For example, the proposed standard reminds auditors that more persuasive audit evidence is obtained from a substantive analytical procedure when the procedure is more precise and uses more reliable information. The proposed standard also provides that when designing and performing the procedure, the auditor should evaluate the relevance and reliability of information used in accordance with AS 1105 Audit Evidence. Notably, the proposal retains the concept reflected in the current standard that for significant risks of material misstatement, including fraud risks, the auditor is required to perform substantive procedures that include test of details specifically responsive to the assessed risk. The proposal does not repeat certain provisions from the existing standard, such as audit documentation requirements that are effectively set forth in other standards. In addition, the proposal includes important amendments to other PCAOB standards. First, to better differentiate between substantive analytical procedures and analytical procedures performed for other purposes under PCAOB standards, such as a risk assessment procedure, the proposal includes an amendment that would clarify the general description of analytical procedures included in AS 1105. Next, the proposal includes an amendment to AS 2301, providing that when applying substantive procedures, including substantive analytical procedures, to accounts or disclosures that depend on information the company received from external sources, the auditor is required to examine relevant information from the external sources. Advancements in technology are contributing to the increase in the volume and sources of information that is used as audit evidence. This information includes both company-produced information, such as invoices issued to customers or payments to suppliers, and external information, such as customer payments received by the company or market interest rates obtained from third-party sources. There is a risk that over-reliance on information produced by the company may decrease the overall quality of audit evidence obtained because under PCAOB standards, company-produced information generally provides less reliable evidence than information from a knowledgeable external source. The amendment to AS 2301 is designed to mitigate this risk. I will now turn the floor over to Martin and Carrie to provide some additional remarks.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. The Office of Economic and Risk Analysis has performed an economic analysis of the proposal that the board is considering today. The economic analysis includes establishing a baseline of firm performance under today's standards, identifying a need for the proposed standard and amendments, evaluating the economic impacts of the proposal, and assessing reasonable alternatives. We believe the economic analysis contained in this release even-handedly sets out the likely economic effects of proposed AS 2305 and the related amendments. We look forward to receiving input on this proposing release. In particular, relevant data and analysis would be most informative to any future consideration of the proposal. I will now turn it over to Carrie von Boos to present the details of our analysis.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. To understand the current practices for firms' design and performance of substantive analytical procedures, staff reviewed firm methodologies, information about firms' use of technology-based tools, observations from PCAOB oversight activities, and academic literature regarding substantive analytical procedures. Overall, the staff's research suggests that some auditors perceive regulatory risks when using substantive analytical procedures to obtain audit evidence, and that auditors' use of technology-assisted analysis in designing and performing audit procedures, including substantive analytical procedures, is becoming more prevalent. Additionally, the staff has observed situations where auditors did not appropriately perform substantive analytical procedures. The increased use of substantive analytical procedures and the continued observance of situations in which auditors did not appropriately perform substantive analytical procedures lead to a risk that relevant and reliable audit evidence will not be obtained if such procedures are not designed and performed appropriately. The proposal contains several revisions that are intended to reduce the risk of not obtaining relevant and reliable audit evidence. There is also a risk that auditors may choose not to perform substantive analytical procedures, even if performing them alone or in combination with other procedures could be a more effective way of obtaining audit evidence. The proposal includes several provisions that are designed to address this risk. The proposed standard and amendments may lead auditors to design and perform audit procedures more efficiently and effectively. More efficient and effective audit procedures may lead to higher audit quality, more efficient audits, lower audit fees, or some combination of the three. To the extent the proposal would lead to higher audit quality, it would benefit investors and other financial statement users by reducing the likelihood that a material misstatement is not detected. Auditors are also expected to benefit from the proposal because the additional clarity provided by the proposal should reduce regulatory uncertainty and the associated compliance costs. We anticipate that firms would modify their existing audit approaches as a result of the proposal and would incur certain fixed costs, including costs to update audit methodologies, templates, and tools, prepare training materials, train their staff, and develop or purchase software. Firms also may incur variable engagement level costs to perform substantive analytical procedures in accordance with the proposal. If firms perceive the costs associated with the use of substantive analytical procedures to be high relative to the benefits, they have the option to perform other substantive procedures, that is, tests of details. In closing, I would like to thank our colleagues in the Office of the Chief Auditor and the Office of the General Counsel at the PCAOB, as well as SEC staff, for their support in the development of our economic analysis. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Barb to present the staff's recommendation.
Thank you. In closing, the staff recommends that the board issue for public comment a proposed standard for designing and performing substantive analytical procedures and related amendments to other board standards substantially in the form provided to you. We would now be happy to respond to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, Dominica, Donna, Martin, and Carrie. At this time, my fellow board members and I have the opportunity to make a statement or ask questions of the staff. We will proceed in the order of seniority, and I will begin. Performing substantive analytical procedures is a common approach for auditors to address a relevant assertion of a significant account or disclosure. The requirements for performing such procedures are included in Auditing Standard AS 2305, Substantive Analytical Procedures. Although there have been targeted amendments to the standard over the years by the PCAOB, the main aspects of the standard largely resemble what first became effective in 1989. Consequently, it does not reflect developments that have taken place in the auditing environment in the past 35 years. For example, advances in technology and a greater availability of information that is being used by the auditing profession in obtaining audit evidence. In addition, there are certain requirements in the existing standard that are duplicative of other board-issued standards, such as requirements related to documentation. We have observed through our oversight activities that auditors do not always design and perform substantive analytical procedures appropriately. This includes a lack of developing a precise enough expectation to compare the company's recorded amount or an amount derived from a recorded amount. As another example, we have observed auditors failing to determine an amount for which differences between the auditor's expectation and the company's recorded amount would require further investigation. When these situations occur, there is a strong likelihood that auditors have not obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support their opinions accompanying the issuer's financial statements, leaving investors at risk. The proposal that is before us today is designed to address these and other shortcomings. For example, proposed AS 2305 strengthens and clarifies the auditor's requirements for evaluating the difference between the auditor's expectation and the company's recorded amount and requires the auditor to determine if there is a misstatement. The proposal also recognizes the standard in a logical this proposal also reorganizes the standard in a logical, systematic approach to performing substantive analytical procedures that is intended to make it much easier for auditors to follow. Finally, the proposal includes an amendment to AS 2301, the auditor's responses to the risks of material misstatement, that would more explicitly require the auditor to obtain external information as part of performing substantive procedures on a company's accounts or disclosures that depend on information the company received from one or more external sources. For example, this would typically require the auditor to obtain such external information when testing transactions with third parties. The economic impacts of this proposal are thoroughly addressed in the economic analysis section. The world has changed over the last 35 years, and it's past time the standard caught up. Collectively, these updates are intended to lead auditors to obtain the sufficient appropriate audit evidence necessary to support their opinion, ultimately reducing the risk of a material misstatement goes undetected, improving overall audit quality, and leaving investors better protected. I encourage all of our stakeholders to read the proposal and provide your perspectives on our questions and other thoughts you may have on this important project. In closing, I would like to thank those individuals that have significantly contributed to this proposal. Specifically, I would like to thank in our Office of Chief Auditor, Barbara Vanage, Dima Edrenenko, Dominika Tarasevich, Donna Siltnetter, Kara Wiedemann, and Sarah Madras. In the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Martin Schmalz, Eric Durbin, John Cook, Carrie Von Bose, and Dylan Rassier. And in the Office of General Counsel, Connor Rasso, Catherine Kelly, Jennifer Williams, and Katie Riley. Thank you also to my fellow board members and their staff for their contributions. In addition, I would like to recognize the support provided by staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. Lastly, I would like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission's staff, including the staff in the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and assistance. I will now turn to my fellow board members for any statements they may wish to make or questions they would like to pose to the staff. Board Member Ho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Substantive analytical procedure is a specific type of audit procedure used to obtain evidence with respect to financial statement assertions. This type of substantive testing has been in use for decades. In certain cases, substantive analytical procedures can be more effective and efficient than tests of details, which is another type of substantive testing. With the proliferation and advancement of data analytics methods, opportunities exist to further enhance substantive analytical procedures or expand their use. In particular, I appreciate that this amendment clarifies the use of substantive analytical procedures in this modern data era and helps mitigate the regulatory uncertainty by doing so. In general, auditors will perform substantive analytical procedures by identifying sufficiently plausible and predictable relationships, developing expectations and thresholds, comparing expectations to recorded company amounts, and evaluating differences. The proposal clarifies the distinction between substantive analytical procedures and other analytical procedures, in that substantive analytical procedures are designed and performed at a level of precision that is sufficient to respond to assessed risks of material misstatement, alone or in combination with other procedures. Put another way, substantive analytical procedures include a more precise auditor expectation and are generally designed and performed on a more disaggregated basis than other types of analytical procedures. Hence, clarifying the differences between substantive analytical procedures and other analytical procedures provides auditors with a clear understanding of their appropriate use to obtain the right level of assurance. Based on the staff research in developing this proposal, some auditors indicated that technology-assisted analysis helps to identify additional plausible and predictable relationships, leading to more substantive analytical procedures and increasing the likelihood to identify potential misstatements. As such, it is possible substantive analytical procedures could be a good candidate to explore the use of artificial intelligence to improve audit quality. Machine learning techniques could be used to identify plausible and predictable relationships on large amounts of data. This may help auditors expand the use of substantive analytical procedures and design more precise expectations when using substantive analytical procedures during the audit engagement. Even further into the future, I believe that AI could be utilized to efficiently perform tests of details on the entire population of a particular account, possibly in lieu of performing substantive analytical procedures for some accounts. These examples just scratch the surface of the potential use of AI on audit engagements, and I expect that the profession will identify many valuable use cases in the near future. In closing, I support this proposal and encourage all stakeholders to provide comment letters on the potential benefits, challenges, and costs associated with this proposal. I would like to express my appreciation to the Office of the Chair, the Office of the Chief Auditor, especially Dima Andrienko, Dominika Taraskevich, and Donna Soniter for their leadership on this proposal and their proactive engagement with me and my staff, and the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis for their contributions to the proposal. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Stein, the floor is yours. Board Member Stein, I think you're on mute.
Thank you for telling me that. Good afternoon. Today, the staff is recommending that the board issue a proposal to modernize a standard written nearly 40 years ago. The board incorporated this particular decades-old standard into its audit standards in 2003. In particular, the proposed standard focuses on the auditor's responsibilities when designing and performing what are typically known as substantive analytical procedures. The staff have concluded that it is necessary to replace the decades-old interim standard in its entirety, to update, clarify, and strengthen the auditor's responsibility when designing and performing audit procedures that involve an auditor's use of relationships to develop a prediction of amounts or balances recorded in a company's books and records. For example, under the proposal, the auditor must answer the following questions. 1. Do I have a sufficient basis to determine a plausible and predictable relationship? 2. Can I develop a sufficiently precise expectation of amounts or balances that should have been recorded in the company's books and records? 3. Am I able to determine an appropriate threshold for investigating deviations for that expectation? If the auditor can sufficiently satisfy all of those questions, the auditor must then perform additional procedures to evaluate those deviations. The proposed standard underscores and reinforces the importance of auditor judgment and professional skepticism. For example, auditors may not cherry-pick information and must incorporate all relevant information when developing their best estimate expectation. This requires the auditor to understand the company, its legal and economic environment, and events or activities that may affect the auditor's ability to determine whether a logical relationship is both plausible and forms a basis for the prediction. Moreover, the auditor may not shortcut the procedures because the proposed standard would require auditors to incorporate a feedback loop to update this understanding and to critically evaluate any company amounts that differ from their expectations. For example, auditors would not be able to sustain a logical relationship predicated on sales trends occurring prior to the impact of a global pandemic. Additionally, the proposed standard specifies that the auditor may not use the company's amounts or information, based on the company's amounts to develop their expectation. Importantly, the staff is also proposing an amendment to AS 2301, Response to Risk of Material Misstatement. The proposed amendment would require an auditor to examine relevant information that the company received from an external source when relying on that externally sourced information for their procedures. In conclusion, the proposed standard equips the auditor with a principles-based framework for developing a prediction for an amount or balance that they expect to see in the company's books and records. If a prediction can be developed, the auditor must then compare and evaluate the auditor's expectation against the company's actual numbers. These changes provide opportunities for efficiency in addition to increased precision, and I look forward to receiving public comment on the proposal. I, like my fellow board members, would like to acknowledge the efforts and dedication of our staff. From the Office of the Chief Auditor, Dima Andrienko, Dominika Taraskevich, Donna Silknetter, Karen Wiedemann, and Sarah Madras. From the Office of Economic and Research Analysis, Eric Durbin, John Cook, Carrie Von Bose, and Dylan Razier. From the Office of the General Counsel, Connor Rasso, Catherine Kelly, Jennifer Williams, and Katie Riley. I would also like to thank the many individuals from the Division of Registration and Inspection and individuals from the Division of Enforcement Investigations who helped with the project. I look forward to receiving public comment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I support issuing the proposal to revise Auditing Standard 2305. Just as an architect seeks to design sound structures, an auditor should design and implement sound audit responses to appropriately address risk of material misstatements during an audit. Substantive analytical procedures have long been in use by auditors, but greater availability of information in electronic form, increased use of technology-based tools by auditors to analyze such information, and changes to other PCAOB standards such as risk assessment and audit evidence leads us to today's proposal. Our standards must not maintain the status quo in light of these advances. Proposing Audit Standard 2305, which is titled Designing and Performing Substantive Analytic Procedures, sets forth a principle-based approach to be responsive to the evolution in auditing and technology. Substantive analytic procedures must be designed and executed appropriately to be an effective audit tool. At their core, substantive analytic procedures allows auditors to compare recorded amounts in the company's financial statements to an auditor develop expectation based on plausible and predictable relationships. This proposal retains this fundamental blueprint of a substantive analytical procedure. Our oversight activities suggest that modernizing and strengthening this standard may advance audit quality, which would better protect investors. Sound auditing practices build trust in the audit. As noted in the proposing release, the average number of technology-based tools used by U.S. GNF engagement teams increased by 38% from 2018 to 2023. The release further noted that recent inspection results across all of our inspection programs indicate that there continue to be deficiencies in certain aspects of designing and executing substantive analytical procedures. For example, when substantive analytic procedures are not based on sufficiently plausible and predictable relationships, have circular references, include thresholds too wide to precisely identify material misstatements, or involve differences outside of expectation that are not sufficiently evaluated, then material misstatements, whether due to error or fraud, can be missed. Given the continued challenge in applying substantial analytical procedure for some firms, this board has taken action to drive better audit quality. Let's examine a couple of the components of this proposed standard. When designing a substantial analytic procedure, there are a few essential inputs that impact its efficacy. First is the relationship on which the auditor bases his expectation of the recorded amount. The auditor must therefore determine through more than inquiry alone whether the relationship to be used is in the substantial analytic procedure is sufficiently plausible and predictable. This proposed requirement would strengthen this component in the substantive analytical procedure. The quality of the output from a substantive analytic procedure is dependent upon the sufficiency of the inputs. In this case, the plausible and predictable relationship driving the audit expectation. When differences are identified between the auditor's expectation and the company's recorded amount, the next important input to the substantive analytic procedures is determining the threshold for evaluating differences. A threshold that is not sufficiently precise could result in unidentified material misstatements, both individually and in the aggregate. The threshold as proposed should be set at or below tolerable misstatement. This proposed standard also describes considerations in determining the threshold, including taking into account the nature of the count or disclosure, or whether applicable, the component of the account or balance. While it prescribes that the threshold cannot be more than a tolerable misstatement, the threshold cannot be set lower, which could provide a more persuasive audit evidence. Taking into consideration the assessed risk of material misstatement and the substantive objective of the substantive analytical procedures in setting the threshold, this strengthens the requirement to include appropriate guardrails in developing a threshold based on the facts and circumstances of each audit. Evaluation of any difference outside of the auditor established threshold is one of the last inputs in a substantive analytical procedure, but must be completed before an auditor concludes the audit. Differences that exceed an appropriately developed threshold should be evaluated by the auditor through the more than inquiry alone. These differences can't be ignored or explained away, but rather should be evaluated to determine whether there is a misstatement. All of these inputs built together are necessary to produce a reliable substantive analytic procedure. Any deficiency in these inputs to a substantive analytic procedure could lead to an unsupported output, that is, an unsupported audit opinion, which could put an investor or investors at risk. Based on these aspects, I am in full support of today's proposal to modernize, strengthen, and clarify the requirements around substantive analytic procedures. I am particularly interested in hearing from all stakeholders on the various aspects of the revised standard, given the increased prevalence of the use of technology in performing substantive analytic procedures. Our standards benefit from stakeholder input, and I look forward to hearing from comments from commenters. In the last 2.5 years, this board has convincingly executed its commitment to modernize standards. Since 2022, this board has issued 10 proposals, including this one today. This is the largest number of proposals in any 2-year period since the inception of the PCAOB. These efforts demonstrate our continued commitment to ensure our standards, many of which haven't been updated since 2003 and are fit for purpose. To accomplish this feat, I would like to commend unequivocally the dedicated and technically gifted staff of the PCAOB for this proposing release. I would like to thank in the Office of the Chief Auditor, Barbara Vanich, Demo Andriyenko, Dominika, Terry Skivich, Donna Silknilter, Karen Wiedemann, and Sarah Madras. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Martin Schmaltz, John Cook, Eric Durbin, Karen Van Bos, and Dylin Rassner. From the Office of General Counsel, Catherine Kelly, Jennifer Williams, Connor Rasso, and Katie Riley. Thank you additionally to the individuals from the Division of Registration and Inspection and the Division of Enforcement and Investigation who informed the proposal in front of us today. Thank you to the SEC staff within the Office of the Chief Accountant for their input, as well as my fellow board members, their staff, and my staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Bodick, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Williams. I am pleased to support today's proposal. I believe the proposed AS 2305, Designing and Performing Substantive Analytical Procedures, and the related amendments do an excellent job of clarifying and streamlining certain aspects of one of the most frequently used audit procedures to promote audit quality. This proposal exemplifies the importance of the comprehensive approach we are taking in our standard setting agenda. It takes a standard that is over 30 years old and has not been substantially changed since being adopted by the PCAOB in 2003 and considers it in light of the observations we have gathered in 2 decades of oversight activities. Staff has seen the way it interacts with other rules and standards and has proposed to amend it accordingly. The result is a proposal that benefits from hindsight perspective and is also forward-looking to meet the needs of investors well into the future. In this instance, our inspectors have consistently identified a relatively high rate of findings related to the use of substantive analytical procedures. They have also observed the increased use and importance of these procedures in light of advancements in technology. Accordingly, significantly more information is available from companies which help to develop substantive analytical procedures, and more sophisticated tools are available for performing them. Rigorously designed and properly executed substantive analytical procedures are a powerful way of obtaining audit evidence and as such have a strong correlation to audit quality. The amendments propose developing expectations that are plausible, predictable, and precise. They also provide additional clarity for evaluating when the difference between the auditor's expectation and the company's amount requires further evaluation and when the difference represents a misstatement. This proposed standard offers specific clarity of auditor responsibilities when using substantive analytical procedures and specifies certain additional requirements to make it more likely that these procedures will appropriately be designed and performed. Clarifications and new requirements that would particularly equip auditors to perform robust procedures include a clear prohibition to avoid circular auditing, a clear declaration that inquiry alone is not sufficient to determine the appropriateness of the relationship used, an explicit prompt to the auditor to consider potentially disconfirming information when developing an expectation, considerations to minimize the auditor's over-reliance on company-produced information, and guidance on how the auditor can avoid reliance on unreliable relationships between data elements. Finally, the proposed standard also better integrates itself with the PCAOB's existing risk assessment standards and is consistent with the format and terminology of other board-issued standards. Given the recognized correlation of a thorough and well-designed risk assessment with audit quality, the integration and alignment of this proposed standard is significant. The end product should be a standard that is easier to understand, easier to apply, and results in higher quality audits. The remaining 2 items on today's agenda are votes to adopt. Both of those projects benefited from comments received from the public after they were proposed. I encourage all stakeholders, and particularly those from smaller firms, to submit your thoughts on this proposal. As I noted last week at the Forum for Auditors of Small Businesses and Broker-Dealers, smaller firms have unique and different attributes that should be kept top of mind when considering new standards. It is from this diversity of perspectives that the best results often emerge. I end with thanks to the staff for all their hard work on this project. I'm particularly grateful for the time they spent answering my questions. I extend my gratitude to the staff of the Office of the Chief Auditor, the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, the Office of the General Counsel, the Division of Registration and Inspections, and the Division of Enforcement and Investigations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unless there are any further discussions from the board, I will now call for a vote on the staff's recommendation. Board Member Ho. I think you're on mute, Board Member Ho.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Board Member Stein.
I also support the recommendation.
Thank you, Board Member Thompson.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Bodick.
I also support the recommendation.
Thank you. I also support the recommendation. All votes are unanimous. The recommendation is approved. The next order of business before the board today is a staff recommendation that the board adopt amendments to two PCAOB auditing standards, AS 1105 Audit Evidence and AS 2301, the auditor's responses to the risks of material misstatement, and conforming amendments to another auditing standard to address aspects of audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis of information in electronic form. To present the staff's recommendation, I will turn again to our Chief Auditor, Barbara Vantage.
The Office of the Chief Auditor is pleased to recommend that the board adopt amendments related to aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis of information in electronic form. The amendments would update requirements in the board's standard on audit evidence, AS 1105, and the standard on responding to assessed risk of material misstatement, AS 2301, to address certain aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis. Auditors are expanding their use of technology-assisted analysis, which has enabled auditors to obtain and analyze more information in different ways and identify more items for further investigation. The amendments before you are not designed to be the answer to the use of technology by auditors, but rather the amendments are an important stepping stone as part of the board's effort to improve investor protection by modernizing its standards. The amendments are designed to decrease the likelihood that an auditor who performs audit procedures using technology-assisted analysis will issue an auditor's report without obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence that provides the auditor with a reasonable basis for the opinion they express. They address areas where PCAOB oversight activities have identified instances of noncompliance with PCAOB standards, areas where investors have raised concerns related to the auditor's use of technology-assisted analysis, and areas where auditors have raised questions during the staff's research regarding the applicability of PCAOB standards to the use of technology-assisted analysis. The amendments have been informed by outreach to investors, auditors, preparers, audit committees, and others through the board's research project on data and technology, and from comment letters submitted in response to the proposal the board issued last year. Before I turn to the project team to discuss the specific amendments, I would like to acknowledge the many people within the PCAOB who provided significant contributions to this project. First, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the team that led this project: Dima Andrienko, Dominika Taraskevich, Donna Silknitter, Rob Cole, Fran Lasan, and Hunter Jones from the Office of the Chief Auditor, as well as our other OCA colleagues who provided support on the project. Additionally, I would like to thank our colleagues from other offices for their significant contributions. In particular, Martin Schmalz, Eric Durbin, Michael Gerbit, John Cook, Carrie Von Bose, and Nick Galunik in the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Connor Rasso, Catherine Kelly, and Vince Meehan in the Office of General Counsel. I would also like to recognize the support provided by the staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. And finally, I would like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff of the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and assistance with this project. Dima Andrienko and Donna Silknitter of the Office of the Chief Auditor will now provide an overview of the amendments, and then Martin Schmalz and Carrie Von Bose of the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis will provide some additional remarks, followed by our recommendation. Dima?
I would like to start by highlighting key aspects of the amendments to AS 2301. First, the amendments include a new section of AS 2301 that describes tests of details and specifies the auditor's responsibilities when investigating items identified in a test of details. These provisions clarify that a test of details involves performing audit procedures with respect to items included in an account or disclosure, such as the date, amount, or contractual terms of a transaction. Under the new provision, when performing a test of details, the auditor is required to apply audit procedures that are appropriate to the particular audit objective to each item selected for testing. In response to comments, the amendments do not compare a test of details to analytical procedures, and the current description of analytical procedures in AS 1105 has been retained. Next, the amendments on the auditor's investigation of items when performing audit procedures were narrowed to apply only to test of details. In response to commenters, considerations related to the auditor's risk assessment procedures and other substantive procedures that are required under existing PCAOB standards were not repeated in the final amendments. When performing a test of details, including tests that use technology-assisted analysis, the auditor may identify items that require further investigation. The amendments clarify that the auditor's investigation is part of the auditor's response to the risks of material misstatement. Consistent with the proposal, the amendments are principles-based and do not prescribe the nature, timing, or extent of audit procedures performed to investigate the identified items. The auditor determines the nature, timing, and extent of these procedures in accordance with existing PCAOB standards. The amendments further clarify that the auditor's investigation of the identified items should include determining whether they individually or in the aggregate indicate misstatements that should be evaluated in accordance with AS 2810 or deficiencies in the company's internal control over financial reporting. When a test of details is performed on specific items selected by the auditor, the amendments set forth the auditor's responsibilities for addressing the remaining items in the population. As discussed, the auditor's responsibilities over the remaining items in the population are described in existing PCAOB standards, and it reminds the auditor of those responsibilities. I will now hand it over to Donna to discuss other important aspects of the amendments.
Thank you, Dima. Good afternoon again, Chair Williams and board members. I'd like to touch on the key amendments to AS 1105 that are part of this rulemaking. First, the amendments address auditor responsibilities when using an audit procedure for more than one purpose. The final amendment is substantively consistent with the proposal and would specify that if the auditor uses an audit procedure for more than one purpose, the auditor should achieve each objective of the procedure. Second, the amendments address auditor responsibilities when evaluating the reliability of external information provided by the company in electronic form, which has become more prevalent. In consideration of comments received on the proposal, several modifications were made to the amendments, which provides that the auditor should evaluate whether external information provided by the company in electronic form and used as audit evidence is reliable. For example, the final amendments clarify the auditor's responsibilities to test the information to determine whether it has been modified by the company or test the relevant controls over the information. The amendments also emphasize the importance of controls over information technology for the reliability of audit evidence. As auditors obtain and use large volumes of information in electronic form provided by the company, the reliability of such information is increased when the company's controls over that information, including, where applicable, information technology general controls and automated application controls, are effective. And the amendments emphasize this principle. The amendments do not require auditors to test controls to determine that the information is reliable. Lastly, consistent with the proposal, the final amendments emphasize that the relevance of audit evidence depends on the level of disaggregation or detail of information necessary to achieve the objective of the audit procedure. Also consistent with the proposal, the amendments update certain terminology used to describe obtaining audit evidence throughout AS 1105 and conforming amendments. I will now again turn the floor over to Martin and Carrie to provide some additional remarks.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. The Office of Economic and Risk Analysis has performed an economic analysis of the amendments that the board is considering today. The economic analysis includes establishing a baseline of firm performance under today's standards, identifying a need for the amendments, evaluating the economic impacts of the amendments, and assessing reasonable alternatives. We appreciate the input of commenters on the proposing release for the amendments and have carefully considered the information provided to us through the notice and comment process in developing the economic analysis for this adopting release. We believe the economic analysis contained in this release even-handedly sets out the likely economic effects of the amendments to AS 1105 and AS 2301. I now turn it over to Carrie von Boos to present the details of our analysis.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. As part of establishing the baseline, staff reviewed tools firms use in technology-assisted analysis. The review shows that the tools are often used to visualize, summarize, and tabulate data, and that the number of tools used is increasing. Staff also reviewed research on auditors' use of technology-assisted analysis. Overall, the research suggests that technology-assisted analysis, or data analytics, is becoming more common in various aspects of the audit, primarily risk assessment, and to a lesser extent, substantive procedures. It also suggests that some firms are reluctant to implement data analytics in their approach due to perceived regulatory risks. Although information in electronic form and technology-based tools are becoming increasingly available to auditors, firms may lack incentives to make the most effective and efficient use of them. Our research indicates that current PCAOB standards have not precluded auditors from using technology-assisted analysis to obtain audit evidence. However, the existing standards do not specify certain aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve such analysis. Consequently, under existing standards, there is a risk that when using technology-based tools to design and perform audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis, auditors may fail to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence when addressing one or more financial statement assertions. Furthermore, there is a risk that perceived regulatory uncertainty may prompt auditors not to perform audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis, even if performing such procedures would be a more effective or efficient way of obtaining audit evidence. The amendments my colleagues in OCA just discussed address both of these risks in a number of ways. For example, the amendments specify procedures the auditor should perform to evaluate the reliability of external information maintained by the company in electronic form and used as audit evidence. The amendments also clarify that if the auditor uses an audit procedure for more than one purpose, the auditor should achieve each objective of the procedure. The amendments may lead auditors to design and perform audit procedures more efficiently and effectively. More efficient and effective audit procedures may lead to higher audit quality, more efficient audits, lower audit fees, or some combination of the three. To the extent that the amendments lead to higher audit quality, they will benefit investors and other financial statement users by reducing the likelihood that a material misstatement is not detected. To the extent that firms make changes to their existing audit approaches as a result of the amendments, they may incur certain fixed costs, including costs to update audit methodologies, templates, and tools, prepare training materials, train their staff, and develop or purchase software, as well as variable engagement level costs to perform procedures in accordance with the amendments. Because the amendments do not require the auditor to use technology-assisted analysis when designing and performing audit procedures, impacts associated with greater use of technology will likely be limited to cases where the benefits to the auditor will justify the costs to the auditor, as well as any fixed costs required to update the auditor's approach. In closing, I would like to thank our colleagues in the Office of the Chief Auditor and the Office of the General Counsel at the PCAOB, as well as SEC staff for their support in the development of our economic analysis. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Barb to present the staff's recommendation.
In closing, the staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments related to aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis of information in electronic form to board standards substantially in the form provided to you. We also recommend that the board instruct the staff to submit the amendments to the Securities and Exchange Commission for approval pursuant to Section 107 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 as amended, and that the board request that the SEC approve the application of the amendments to the audits of emerging growth companies. That concludes our prepared remarks, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, Dima, Donna, Martin, and Carrie. At this time, my fellow board members and I will have an opportunity to make a statement or ask questions to the staff. We will proceed in the order of seniority, and I will begin. Our capital markets do not stand still. They evolve constantly. Practices change and technology advances relentlessly. To keep investors protected, our standards must keep up. This is why I and my fellow board members specifically included modernizing our standards as the first goal of our strategic plan, and further why we have an objective within this goal focused on evaluating developments on data and technology as we consider enhancements to our standards. Audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis offer the potential to be an effective approach to obtain persuasive audit evidence, enhancing investor protection. Today, some firms are using technology-assisted analysis to obtain audit evidence. In certain cases, our oversight activities have found instances of non-compliance with our standards related to evaluating the relevance and reliability of company-provided information and evaluating certain items identified using technology-assisted analysis. Other firms appear to be reluctant to perform technology-assisted analysis due to perceived regulatory uncertainty, as our standards do not specifically address the performance of such analysis. Consequently, and as highlighted by our economic analysis, there is a need to change our standards to address more specifically certain aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve such analysis. This is why we issued a proposal just shy of 1 year ago to amend our standards in this area. I am grateful for the commenters that provided feedback on the proposal. The staff have taken your input into consideration at updating the amendments before us today. This project focuses on areas where PCAOB oversight activities have identified instances of noncompliance with PCAOB standards and areas where auditors have raised questions during our research regarding the applicability of PCAOB standards to the use of technology-assisted analysis. These areas include specifying auditors' responsibilities when performing tests of details, using an audit procedure for more than one purpose, investigating certain items identified by the auditor when performing a test of details, and evaluating the reliability of information the company receives from external sources that is provided to the auditor in electronic form and used as audit evidence. These changes address the risks that exist when using technology-based tools to design and perform audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis. For example, if an auditor does not appropriately investigate certain items identified through technology-assisted analysis when performing a test of details, the auditor may fail to identify misstatements that would need to be evaluated under PCAOB standards. In other situations, the amendments noted in this project address the risk that an auditor may inappropriately rely on information received electronically from a third party via the company without properly evaluating whether the information is sufficient and appropriate for purposes of the audit. Equally important, these changes also address the risk that some auditors may choose not to perform audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis due to concerns about its appropriateness under existing standards, even if performing such procedures would be a more effective way of obtaining audit evidence. Collectively, these changes will improve auditors' execution in performing audit procedures using technology-assisted analysis for the benefit of investors and other users of companies' financial statements. The economic analysis included in the release further supports these and other benefits of the amendments to our standards, as this is just one aspect related to developments in data and technology in the accounting and auditing professions. Our data and technology research project remains active. Our staff will continue to leverage insights from this research project as they assess the need for guidance, other changes to PCAOB standards, or other regulatory actions considering the increased use of technology-based tools by auditors and preparers. I would like to express my gratitude to those individuals that have significantly contributed to this project. Specifically, I would like to thank in the Office of the Chief Auditor, Barbara Vantage, Dima Adrianenko, Dominika Taraskevich, Donna Silknitter, Rob Cole, Hunter Jones, and Fran Lyson. In the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Martin Schmalz, Eric Durbin, Mike Gerbit, John Cook, Carrie Von Bose, and Nick Galunik. In the Office of General Counsel, Connor Rasso, Catherine Kelly, and Vince Meehan. I would also like to thank my fellow board members and their staff for their contributions. In addition, I would like to recognize the support provided by staff from the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and the Office of Communications and Engagement. Finally, I would like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff of the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and assistance. I will now turn to my fellow board members for any statements they may wish to make or questions they would like to pose to the staff. Board Member Ho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. In my June 2023 statement in support of the proposal, I noted that although limited in scope, since the proposal did not address the use of emerging technologies in audits such as artificial intelligence, advanced automation, or emerging areas such as digital assets, I consider the proposal an important step in setting auditing standards for the 21st century. I appreciate all the thoughtful comments from our stakeholders. Commenters were supportive of modernizing the relevant standards due to technological advancements in the past 2 decades. Today, I'm pleased to support the final adoption. Although I support the adoption of this standard today, I have concerns about the number of standards that will become effective by next year and the associated impact on the firm's capacity to effectively implement all the newly adopted standards. Subject to SEC approval, this standard will become effective for audits of financial statements for fiscal year beginning on or after December 15, 2025. Other standards that will become effective within the same general period include other auditors effective for audits of financial statements for fiscal years ending on or after December 15, 2024. AS 1000, subject to SEC approval, generally effective for audits of financial statements for fiscal years beginning on or after December 15, 2024. Confirmations, effective for audits of financial statements for fiscal years ending on or after June 15, 2025. Quality control, subject to SEC approval, effective on December 15, 2025. Ultimately, it will be the auditor's responsibility to implement these standards. However, there will also be an effect on issuers, including the likely increase of audit fees resulted from additional auditing procedures as well as additional documentation requests. Only time will illuminate the associated impacts of these standards. The PCAOB can help by continuing to conduct and publish the results of our post-implementation reviews and associated analyses on the above standards. One commenter who generally supported this particular initiative also stressed the importance of monitoring the impact by stating, "We believe that the PCAOB should monitor the impact of the implementation of these standards to ensure that they do not serve as a deterrence or reduction in their use. The use of these powerful technology-based tools in audits, when used appropriately, can be impactful in reducing audit risks and audit failures, which benefits the public." Separately, the adopting release indicates that the amendments are focused on addressing certain aspects of technology-assisted analysis, not specific matters relating to other technology applications used in audits, such as blockchain or artificial intelligence, or the evaluation of the appropriateness of tools under the firm's system of quality control. In other words, this standard was not intended to cover the use of AI and other similar technologies in conducting public company audits. Some commenters took note of this scope limitation in the proposal and encouraged PCAOB to expand the scope to include AI. I agree that AI is an important area for regulators to consider given the opportunity to improve audit quality as well as potential risks of misuse. And I believe that PCAOB should continue to learn more about AI and gain further insights regarding the impact on issuers and auditors. Many technology companies have invested in AI for years. The American public has already adopted AI technology in many aspects of their lives, with the proliferation of smart wearable devices to monitor personal health and the use of smartphones, as well as home devices with voice-generated AI. Furthermore, I learned from my time working with federal agencies that some federal agencies started to explore use cases on AI over 20 years ago. Within the auditing context, large audit firms started making significant investments in AI technology in the past several years. For example, 2 of the Big 4 firms recently announced significant upgrades to their AI capabilities related to their audit and assurance work. Another Big 4 firm recently agreed to become OpenAI's first reseller of ChatGPT to clients. Since the beginning of my appointment on the PCAOB board, I have been an advocate for the PCAOB to be forward-thinking in the technology area. We cannot afford to be silent observers. We have the opportunity to learn more about AI in relation to auditing and be proactive with respect to auditors' responsible use of AI in public company audits. Although not addressing this specific standard, the PCAOB has not lost sight of AI's fast development and potential significant impact on audits. Our investor advisory group recently provided a valuable presentation to the board on AI. The Technology Innovation Alliance working group that the board launched 18 months ago has focused on advising the board on the use of emerging technologies, including AI. Under Chair Williams' leadership, the PCAOB has not only been focused on updating and strengthening our auditing standards, but also looking toward the future of auditing. In closing, I support the adoption of this new standard. I would like to express my appreciation to the Office of the Chair, the Office of the Chief Auditor, especially Dima Andrienko and Donna Suniter for their continued leadership from the proposal to this adopting release, and the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis for their contributions to this final standard. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Today, the board is considering a staff recommendation to approve the first auditing standard focused on certain technology tools that auditors may deploy during an audit. Since the beginning of the profession, technology has been a part of how auditors improve their overall effectiveness and efficiency. As many of you know, the board has been focused on empowering auditors to obtain higher quality evidence during an audit. And recent advances in technology have become powerful new tools in that regard. Opportunities abound for innovative technology to increase the coverage of the audit, decrease the effort, and offer deeper insights through pattern recognition, identification of population anomalies, and most importantly, earlier discovery of fraud. The standard also extends the board's focus on obtaining evidence from external sources, which was highlighted in the board's updating of the confirmation standard last year. So I am pleased that the staff has constructed an audit standard that empowers auditors to exercise their professional judgment and skepticism in deploying technology to assist in obtaining high quality evidence during the audit. Of course, there are also risks when innovative technology is deployed without defining its objective and its purpose. The standard before us today recognizes that any benefits obtained from using innovative technologies may be overcome by the risks when deployed without the auditor defining their objective and purpose when carrying out audit procedures. Moreover, the benefits of technology can only be realized if the underlying information is reliable. Today, many original documents are stored electronically with key attributes extracted into a standardized database. These tools can only be used effectively if the auditor understands the company's information environment, its processes and controls, and its legal and economic environment. Importantly, the staff recommendation clarifies the need to evaluate the relevance and the reliability of information, regardless of its source, because technology also makes it easier to falsify electronic information. Technology will not replace auditor judgment or professional skepticism, which must always be exercised and is paramount in understanding and evaluating the inputs and the outputs of such technology-assisted analysis. The phrase garbage in, garbage out aptly describes the concern that investors and other stakeholders have with auditors' increasing usage of technology-based tools. Although this makes a full sample analysis feasible, it also raises the need for evaluating the controls of this attribute extraction process. Better designed and executed audit procedures increase overall audit quality, and higher quality evidence should lead to better outcomes, including the earlier discovery of fraud. Although this standard does not touch upon more recent technological developments in the audit landscape, it is a necessary first step, and I look forward to the staff's continued work on data and technology issues. I, like my fellow board members, would like to thank the Office of the Chief Auditor team, Dima, Dominica, wait one second here, Donna, Silk Knitter, Hunter Jones, Rob Cole, and Fran Lizone. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Eric Durbin, Michael Gerbett, John Cook, Carrie Von Bose, and Nick Galunik. And from the Office of General Counsel, Connor Rosso, Catherine Kelly, and Vince Meehan. Thank you for all of your hard work on this project, and I have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I am in support of adopting these amendments to Auditing Standard 1105, Audit Evidence, to AS 2301, the auditor's responses to the risk of material misstatement, and conforming amendments to AS 2501, auditing accounting estimates, including fair value measurements. The audit profession, like many other professions, must grapple with the impact of growing use of technology. Our research around the broader topic of data and technology, which is ongoing, indicates that auditors have expanded their use of tools to perform technology-assisted analysis or data analytics. As the days of paper standard-based auditing fade away, along with the fax machine, I support amending our existing standards to reflect the evolution of the use of data analytics in auditing. Sufficient, appropriate audit evidence remains a requirement despite the evolution in the technology-based tools deployed to obtain that evidence. I believe these amendments will ensure that sufficient, appropriate audit evidence remains the bar that auditors achieve when these tools are used in the audit. I am pleased that most commenters on the proposal supported the board's efforts to modernize certain aspects of designing and performing audit procedures that involve technology-assisted analysis. I believe that we have been responsive to various commenters' suggestions for clarification. I would like to highlight just a few changes made in this adopting release in response to commenters' viewpoints, which strengthen this standard. First, test of details is no longer described in comparison to analytical procedures. The description of test of details emphasizes that the audit procedures applied are appropriate to the particular audit objectives. By requiring auditors to focus on the audit objectives, it reduces confusion on the purpose of the procedures. Second, paragraph 50 of Auditing Standard 2301 clarifies that the auditor has a responsibility when selecting specific items for testing to determine whether there is a reasonable possibility that the remaining items in the balance include a misstatement, individually or in aggregate. This means the auditor cannot simply ignore the remaining untested portion of the population. The requirement, however, does not prescribe the exact nature, timing, and extent of procedures to be performed on the remaining items. This construct strengthens the principle-based nature of this aspect of the standard and is responsive to several commenters. Lastly, I would like to highlight that with the addition of paragraph 10A to Auditing Standard 1105, we incorporated some flexibility for auditor choice when evaluating the reliability of external information provided by the company in electronic form. Auditors can choose to test the information directly to determine whether it has been modified or test controls over receiving, maintaining, and processing the information. This approach maintains the core responsibility of the auditor to evaluate the reliability of information provided by the company while providing optionality on how the auditor chooses to test the information is reliable. These revisions to the proposal, along with some other clarifications, help ensure that our standards can meet the moment as the audit profession evolves. I would like to express my gratitude to the staff for the tremendous amount of rigor in carefully evaluating commenter responses to recommend clarifications and adjustments to this adopting release. In the Office of Chief Auditor, Barbara Vantage, Dima Andrienko, Dominika Taraskiewicz, Donna Sipnitter, Hunter Jones, Rob Cole, and Fran Lezon. In the Office of Economic Analysis, Martin Schmaltz, Eric Durbin, Michael Gerbett, John Cook, Carrie Van Bose, and Nick Gulanich. In the Office of General Counsel, Catherine Kelly, Vance Meehan, and Connor Rasso. Thank you also to the individuals across the Division of Registration and Inspections, the Division of Enforcement and Investigation who contributed thoughts to this final release. Finally, my thanks to the SEC staff within the Office of the Chief Accountant, as well as my fellow board members, their staff, and my staff.
Thank you. Board Member Bodick, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you again, Chair Williams. I am pleased to support this recommendation, which admirably clarifies and amends PCAOB standards to support the auditor's use of technology-based tools and the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence in situations involving technology-based tools. Ensuring our standards are modernized and fit for purpose is not only in keeping with the board's strategic plan, but also makes practical sense and will assist individual auditors in performing audit tasks to better ensure audit quality. I've had a front row seat to the dramatic way the use of technology in audits has changed within just one generation. I vividly recall when early in my auditing career, shared computers first became available to engagement teams, and Lotus 123 was state-of-the-art software. Regression analysis tools used in substantive analytical procedures would look woefully rudimentary to today's auditors. Instead, our profession now relies on sophisticated analytical instruments to aid in the data extraction, transaction testing, and reconciliation testing that comprise modern audits. The PCAOB is engaged in a multi-year effort to modernize standards. Nowhere can the need for modernization be seen more plainly than in the face of the constant march of technology. That is why I am so impressed with what the staff has put together today. These principle-based standards and amendments account for how automation, data analytics, and other processes are currently used in audits, while retaining enough flexibility to account for their inevitable evolution in ways we cannot anticipate. Now, there are many aspects of these amendments worth highlighting, but I will limit myself to 4 main points. First, amendments relate to 2 standards that are fundamental to the execution of audits: AS 1105, Audit Evidence, and AS 2301, the auditor's response to the risks of material misstatement. The auditor's responsibilities in these areas do not change with the nature or type of technology used in the audit, which the release makes clear. Second, the amendments to AS 2301 include specifying auditor responsibilities when investigating items that require further investigation. Third, the amendments clarify the responsibilities when using an audit procedure for more than one purpose. And finally, the amendments update our auditing standards to more specifically address the reliability of information used in designing and performing audit procedures that involve analyzing information in electronic form with technology-based tools. This includes information such as cash receipts, shipping documents, and purchase orders. In designing these amendments, the staff considered findings from our inspection activities and honed in on the all too frequent observation of over-reliance on data produced by the company under audit. The amendments respond by undertaking to ensure auditors have sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support the opinion and allow for auditors to execute their procedures in the most effective way available. The whole exceeds the sum of its parts, and all of these individual components work together to benefit audit quality. I will close first by thanking all those who took the time and effort to submit comment letters. Your perspective on these amendments was detailed and valuable, and the final product reflects those contributions. Second, I want to extend my gratitude to the staff of the Office of the Chief Auditor, the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, the Office of the General Counsel, the Division of Registration and Inspections, and the Division of Enforcement and Investigations for their work on these amendments and for their responses to all my questions. Thank you.
Unless there are any further discussions from the board, I will now call for a vote on the staff recommendation. Board Member Ho.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Stein.
I also support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson.
I also support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Bowdick.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. I also support the recommendation. All votes are unanimous. The recommendation is approved. The final order of business before the board today is a staff recommendation that the board adopt an amendment to PCAOB Rule 3502, which governs the liability of associated persons who contribute to a registered public accounting firm's primary violations of the laws, rules, and standards that Congress has charged the board with enforcing. To present the staff's recommendation, I will turn to our General Counsel, James Capoli.
Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. The Office of the General Counsel is pleased to recommend that the board adopt an amendment to PCAOB Rule 3502, an ethics rule that governs the liability of associated persons who directly and substantially contribute to registered firms' violations of the laws, rules, and professional standards that the PCAOB is responsible for enforcing. The PCAOB's mission is to protect the interests of investors and to further the public interest in the preparation of informative, accurate, and independent audit reports. To that end, Congress has mandated that the PCAOB enforce compliance with certain laws, rules, and professional standards, and that the PCAOB impose sanctions when appropriate upon registered public accounting firms and associated persons that do not comply. That mandate extends to violations committed negligently, that is, as a result of a failure to exercise reasonable care. Indeed, the PCAOB may impose sanctions when appropriate for a single act of negligent conduct that constitutes a violation. And it may impose certain enhanced sanctions when appropriate if a registered firm or an associated person has engaged in repeated instances of such negligence. Yet the PCAOB's current approach to contributory liability does not fully align with the PCAOB's statutory enforcement authority. Rather, the PCAOB's current approach, as reflected in existing Rule 3502, requires a showing of at least recklessness before contributory liability may be imposed. And therefore, today we recommend that the board adopt an amendment to Rule 3502 that corrects this misalignment. In just a moment, I will invite Damon Andrews to present an overview of the amendment. Before doing so, I want to recognize several people who made significant contributions to this project. From the Office of the General Counsel, I want to recognize and thank not only Damon, but also Connor Rosso, Drew Dropkin, and Vince Meehan. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, I want to thank Martin Schmalz, Rasan Inget, Tasneem Raihan, John Cook, Shana Vereen, and Federico Garcia for their partnership and support. From the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, I want to thank Bob Rice, Mike Davis, John Abel, and Bill Ryan for their assistance. I also want to thank the staff from other offices and divisions, including the Office of Communications and Engagement, who provided assistance with this project. And lastly, I want to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff of the SEC's Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support and assistance with this project. Damon Andrews of the Office of the General Counsel will now provide an overview of the amendment, and then Martin Schmalz and Tien Liang of the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis will provide some additional remarks before Damon closes with our recommendation. Damon, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. I'd like to begin by providing an overview of the recommendation before the board to adopt an amendment to PCAOB Rule 3502, which, as mentioned, is an ethics rule that governs the liability of associated persons who contribute to firms' violations of the laws, rules, and standards that the board enforces. Nearly 2 decades ago, the board adopted Rule 3502, and in the years since, the board has brought charges in more than 90 proceedings under the rule. Last September, the board proposed amending the rule to change from recklessness to negligence, the standard of liability for associated persons' contributory conduct. In response, the PCAOB received more than 24 comment letters from an array of stakeholders asserting a variety of views. Staff appreciates this engagement, which helped to inform staff's recommendation today. Having considered these commenters' views, and based on an understanding of the board's experience and to better align the rule with Congress's grant of authority to the board under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, the Office of the General Counsel is recommending that the board adopt an amendment to change from recklessness to negligence the standard of liability for associated persons' contributory conduct. Rule 3502's current formulation places negligent contributors to firms' violations beyond the rule's reach. But registered firms can act only through natural persons. It logically follows, then, that when a registered firm is found to have committed a violation negligently, it is likely that such negligence is due to a natural person's negligence. Rule 3502, however, currently requires a level of culpability higher than negligence, at least recklessness, before the board can impose sanctions against associated persons who contribute to firms' negligence-based violations. Thus, under current Rule 3502, associated persons who do not exercise reasonable care and thereby contribute to firms' violations may escape liability and accountability even while the firms committing the violations do not. Accordingly, staff is recommending that the board amend the liability standard for an associated person's contribution to a firm's violation from recklessness to negligence. Staff believes that the amendment recommended for adoption would enhance and promote investor protection consistent with the board's mandate under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. In staff's view, changing to negligence the liability standard for contributory conduct would promote investor protection in at least two ways. First, we believe that it would make Rule 3502 a more effective deterrent from auditor misconduct, thereby encouraging auditors to act with reasonable care that they already should be deploying in their work. Second, we believe that it would make Rule 3502 a more effective enforcement tool by allowing the board to hold accountable negligent individuals who contribute to firms' violations. Additionally, the change to negligence would align the board's liability standard for contributory conduct with the authority that Congress granted to the board. When Congress enacted Sarbanes-Oxley, it provided to the board the ability to sanction negligent conduct, including single instances of negligence. By no longer requiring at least reckless conduct to be liable for contributing to a firm's violation, the recommended amendment would better align Rule 3502 with the board's statutory authority. I would like to draw to the board's attention two additional facets of today's recommendation. First, I would like to point out that associated persons already are subject to potential liability, including money penalties, for negligently contributing to registered firms' violations of numerous laws and rules governing the preparation and issuance of audit reports via the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Specifically, the Exchange Act authorizes the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to institute cease and desist proceedings against any person that is, was, or would be a cause of a violation of the Exchange Act or any rule or regulation thereunder, due to an act or omission that the person knew or should have known would contribute to such violation. The Exchange Act further authorizes the Commission to impose a civil money penalty upon finding that such person is or was a cause of such violation. Thus, the recommendation to amend Rule 3502's liability threshold would not subject auditors to any new or different liability standard to govern their conduct. Second, staff is recommending that the board retain the directly and substantially modifier to describe the connection between a contributory actor's conduct and a registered firm's primary violation. For conduct to directly contribute to a primary violation, it must either essentially constitute the violation or be a reasonably proximate facilitating event or a reasonably proximate stimulus for the violation. But it need not be the final step in the violation, in the chain of actions, leading to the violation. And for conduct to substantially contribute to a primary violation, it must contribute to the violation in a material or significant way, though it does not need to have been the sole cause of the violation. In short, the amended rule is not intended to reach associated persons' conduct that, while contributing to the violation in some way, is remote from or tangential to the firm's violation. To implement a negligence standard, staff recommends amending the text of Rule 3502 as proposed last September as it relates to the liability standard. Specifically, staff is recommending that the language knowing or recklessly not knowing, which sets forth a recklessness threshold, be changed to knew or should have known, which is classic negligence language. With respect to the effective date, staff is recommending that the amendment to Rule 3502 become effective 60 days from the date of Commission approval. Thus, the amendment would not be retroactive, but rather would apply only to conduct occurring more than 60 days after Commission approval. Before I yield the floor to my colleagues in the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis to present their analysis of the amendment to Rule 3502, I'd first like to publicly recognize and thank several individuals for their contributions to this recommendation. First, I'd like to thank Chair Williams and her staff, as well as all board members and their staffs, for working closely with the Office of General Counsel. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Office of General Counsel, specifically James Capoli, Connor Rosso, Drew Dropkin, and Vince Meehan, for their invaluable input and guidance throughout the process in the run up to this recommendation. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, specifically Martin Schmalz, Rashawn Inget, Tasneem Raihan, John Cook, Shana Vereen, and Federico Garcia for their insights into the economics of the recommended amendment. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, specifically Bob Rice, Mike Davis, John Abel, and Bill Ryan. And finally, I'd like to thank the Securities and Exchange Commission staff, including the staff and the Office of the Chief Accountant, for their support with this project. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Martin for his team to say a few words about the recommendation.
Thank you, Damon. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. The Office of Economic and Risk Analysis has performed an economic analysis of the amendment to Rule 3502 that the board is considering today. The economic analysis includes establishing a baseline of board enforcement activity under the current version of the rule, identifying a need for the amendment, evaluating the economic impacts of the amendment, and assessing reasonable alternatives. We appreciate the input of commenters on the proposing release for the amendment and have carefully considered the information provided to us through the notice and comment process in developing the economic analysis for this adopting release. We believe the economic analysis contained in this release even-handedly sets out the likely economic effects of the amendment to Rule 3502. I'll now turn it over to our Economic Analysis Associate Director, Tian Liang, to present the details of our analysis.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, Chair Williams and board members. From January 1st, 2009 through April 30th, 2024, there have been a total of 96 cases in which associated persons of a firm violated Rule 3502 for an average of 6 cases per year. These 96 cases represent 31% of the total number of cases in which the board sanctioned firms for violations over the same period. This indicates that in over 2/3 of the cases in which a firm was sanctioned, no contributory actor was held accountable under Rule 3502, often because the Division of Enforcement and Investigations reasonably determined not to pursue actions against contributory actors. However, in certain of these cases, the absence of a Rule 3502 charge may reflect a gap in the PCAOB's current regulatory framework. This gap is caused by misalignment between the current liability standard for certain violations by firms and that for individuals under Rule 3502. As my colleague in the Office of the General Counsel pointed out, under the current formulation of Rule 3502, while firms can be held accountable by the PCAOB for violations due to negligence, individuals can be held liable for their contributory conduct only if their conduct was at least reckless, a more stringent standard than negligence. This gap creates regulatory inefficiency. Unlike the PCAOB, the SEC already has the authority to hold individuals accountable for negligence contributory conduct. Thus, in a case involving such conduct, the PCAOB could seek to have the SEC pursue the negligence contributory case, while the PCAOB continues to pursue the negligent primary case against the firm. But given that these cases would relate to the same underlying facts, such an approach would result in duplicated work and give rise to regulatory inefficiency. Or, absent SEC intervention, the negligent contributory conduct may simply go unsanctioned. This lack of individual accountability may result in underdeterrence. The amendment can improve regulatory efficiency by enabling the PCAOB to bring a case involving negligence against the firm and the responsible relevant associated persons. To the extent that associated persons are not acting with reasonable care today because of the gap in the current regulatory framework, the amendment would increase the probability of sanction against individuals and therefore provide additional deterrence against individuals' misconduct. The risk of PCAOB enforcement may incentivize more associated persons to perform their duties with reasonable care, which in turn may enhance the firm's compliance with PCAOB standards. The amendment may also provide firms with incentives to make appropriate investments in staffing and resources necessary to better comply with regulatory requirements. The resulting more robust and reliable compliance environment may lead to improved overall audit quality. While the enhanced enforcement authority provided by the amendment to the rule would ideally prompt any associated persons not already exercising reasonable care to do so. PCAOB staff nonetheless estimated that on average, 2 to 3 additional cases per year might be brought against associated persons under the amendment. As a result, certain firms will incur direct and indirect costs. In most cases, firms are expected to bear the cost of defending associated persons who have negligently contributed to the firm's violation. These costs may include attorney fees and expenses related to increased use of resources such as experts and other personnel. If an associated person is adjudicated as having acted negligently and a sanction is imposed, the individual would incur potential financial costs of having been found liable for contributing to the firm's violation. To the extent that there are civil money penalties, they would be assessed against the individual. Further, associated persons who are the subject of enforcement proceedings under the amendment to Rule 3502 may be distracted from their everyday responsibilities. An individual may also incur reputational costs such as adverse employment or career events. While these consequences may be significant to the individuals, we believe that these consequences would not be significant in the aggregate, considering the number of associated persons across all registered firms and the anticipated 2 to 3 additional proceedings likely to be brought as a result of the amendment. Finally, we acknowledge the potential unintended consequences associated with the amendment. The amendment may result in increased self-protective behavior involving additional auditor effort to perform or document actions to protect against negligent contributory liability, discourage personnel from accepting key roles, or reduce competition in the audit market. However, the existing jurisdiction of the Commission over these matters means that the magnitude of unintended consequences would be limited. In closing, I would like to thank our PCAOB colleagues in the Office of the General Counsel, the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, and our colleagues at the SEC for their collaboration in the development of our economic analysis. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Damon to present the staff's recommendations.
Thank you, Tian. In closing, the staff is recommending that the board adopt the amendment to PCAOB Rule 3502 to change the contributory liability threshold under Rule 3502 from recklessness to negligence and issue the accompanying adopting release in substantially the form provided to you. We're also recommending that the board instruct the staff to submit the amendment to PCAOB Rule 3502 to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on Form 19B4 for the Commission's approval pursuant to Section 107B of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Finally, we're requesting that the board request that the Commission determine, to the extent that Section 103A3C of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act applies, that the application of the amendment to Rule 35, that the application of the amendment to audit, of emerging growth companies is necessary or appropriate in the public interest after considering the protection of investors and whether the action will promote efficiency, competition, and capital formation. Thank you.
Thank you, James, Damon, Martin, and Tian. At this time, my fellow board members and I will have an opportunity to make a statement or ask questions to the staff. We will proceed in the order of seniority, and I will begin. Auditors are highly trained professionals with specialized skills and ethical obligations who are licensed and paid to carry out duties solely entrusted to them. When they fail to exercise the reasonable care or competence entrusted to their profession, investors expect there to be consequences. Today, we have the opportunity to update an outdated PCAOB rule and meet those expectations by ensuring that when an associated person's negligence directly and substantially contributes to firm violations, which can put investors at risk, the PCAOB has tools to hold that associated person accountable. To do this, we are amending PCAOB Rule 3502, responsibility not to knowingly or recklessly contribute to violations. The updates strengthen accountability for associated persons, including individuals and firms who put investors at risk, by updating the threshold for liability for those who directly and substantially contribute to firm violations from recklessness to negligence. This will allow the PCAOB to hold auditors accountable for failing to exercise the same standard of reasonable care and competence they are already required to exercise anytime they are executing their professional duties. As reflected in the thorough economic analysis set forth in the adopting release, there is no reason this amended rule should cost auditors significant time, resources, or money because auditors are already prohibited from being negligent today as part of their requirement to exercise reasonable care and competence anytime they perform an audit. Similarly, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission already has the ability to seek penalties and enforcement actions against associated persons when they negligently cause firm violations. As I've said before, if you're doing what you are already supposed to be doing, this amended rule would not affect you. If you are not, there may be consequences. I also want to reiterate what I said when we issued this proposal. This change is not intended to ensnare junior professionals or other auditors who are responsibly executing their duties. Again, to be liable under the amended rule, not only do associated persons have to act negligently, the amended rule also would maintain the current requirement that their negligence must have contributed to the firm's violation both directly and substantially. That does not include auditors whose conduct is remote from or tangential to the firm's violation. I want to thank everyone who submitted public comment. Your input helped to shape this rule. As proposed, an amendment to the rule would have specified that an associated person can be held liable for contributing to a violation by any registered firm. After contemplating this carefully, it's clear that language was unnecessary. As the board's release explains, the rule as currently written covers all plausible scenarios. So the recommendation before us today maintains the current formulation, which references associated persons who contribute to a violation by a registered firm they are associated with. Like many of the standards this board has voted to modernize, Rule 3502 is nearly 20 years old. Things have changed since it was first adopted in 2005. The SEC now has the ability to seek civil money penalties and enforcement proceedings against associated persons when they negligently cause firm violations. The way that firms operate has changed, and the expert staff at the PCAOB who have seen how Rule 3502 plays out in the real world are recommending this update. Today, we have the opportunity to learn from that expert experience and modernize this outdated rule to ensure there are consequences for negligently, directly, and substantially contributing to firms' violations that can put investors at risk. I would like to express my gratitude to those individuals who have significantly contributed to this proposal. Specifically, I would like to thank in the Office of the General Counsel, James Capoli, Connor Rasso, Drew Dropkin, and Damon Andrews. In the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Martin Schmalz, Rohan Ignet, Tasneem Rehan, Federico Garcia, John Cook, and Shana Reareen. And in the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, Bob Rice, Bill Ryan, John Abel, and Mike Davis. I would also like to thank my fellow board members and their staff for their contributions. In addition, I would also like to recognize the support provided by the Office of Communications and Engagement. Finally, I would like to thank the SEC staff for their support and assistance. I will now turn to my fellow board members for any statements they may wish to make or questions they would like to pose to the staff. Board Member Ho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. On September 19, 2023, I supported the release of the proposal with reservations. For example, I expressed concern that the proposal is silent as to whether the board expects to bring charges under the proposed negligence standard against individuals holding junior audit positions like associates and senior associates. My concerns stem in part from the accounting talent crisis and whether lowering the contributory liability standard from recklessness to negligence would not only exacerbate the accounting talent crisis, but also cause small audit firms to exit the public company auditing business. A number of commenters expressed similar concerns. For example, one commenter wrote that the proposed changes, if adopted, would serve as a catalyst for highly competent auditing professionals and for college students to choose other opportunities outside the accounting profession, further disrupting an already strained pipeline of professionals. Another commenter expressed concern about the proposal's effect on smaller triannually inspected firms and how it could exacerbate the declining number of firms willing to conduct issuer and/or broker-dealer audits, noting that over the last 10 years, the number of PCAOB registered and inspected firms that provide audit reports for issuers has declined from about 650 to 450. The adopting release addresses my reservations and lessens my concerns. Specifically, the adopting release states that the board does not anticipate that a change in the liability standard for contributory conduct will be used to sanction isolated good faith errors in professional judgment, let alone be wielded as a blunt or draconian instrument, including with respect to less senior engagement team members. The adopting release also states that the board emphasizes that it is not the board's intent to pursue foot faults or unintentional slips, pure errors of judgment, and innocuous errors on technicalities. Nor do the board's standards require that auditors exercise perfect judgment at all times to avoid an enforcement action. The adopting release economic analysis estimates that the amendment would result in an average of 2 to 3 more cases per year. In addition, the adopting release also states that the board anticipates that conduct occurring more than 60 days after commission approval would be subject to Rule 3502 as amended, but that conduct occurring prior to or within 60 days after commission approval would not be subject to the amendment to Rule 3502. While the language I quoted from the adopting release is not binding on this board or future boards, it serves as a helpful signal. As a result, I will support the adopting release. However, I will be vigilant to make sure that we follow through on what we say in the adopting release so that we do not make the public company auditing profession so risk-ridden that the best and the brightest pursue careers elsewhere. If we make the public company auditing profession so unattractive in the name of investor protection, we will be doing a disservice in the long run to the investors we are sworn to protect. I want to thank the Office of General Counsel staff, particularly Damon Andrews, and the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis staff, particularly Nazneen Rahan, for their hard work and their responsiveness to my questions. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Williams.
Thank you. Board Member Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I want to start out by thanking our staff for all the hard work they've done on this rule. They're recommending that we revise our ethics rules to provide that auditors may be held accountable when they fail to exercise due care and that failure contributes directly and substantially to violations of PCAOB standards or rules by their audit firm. Auditors have exceptional access to management and to information that cannot be observed by investors and other stakeholders. When auditors do not exercise due care and contribute in a direct and substantial way to violations of PCAOB standards or rules, the PCAOB must be allowed to act. I believe this change will strengthen the board's auditor oversight program. If the PCAOB is not allowed to enforce its standards and rules, particularly when auditors contribute directly and substantially to violations of those standards and rules, investors and other stakeholders will not trust our financial reporting system. And that trust is vital to maintaining the preeminence of our capital markets. More importantly, the change reflects our charge under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to fashion rules, including ethics rules, that focus on an auditor's responsibilities and obligation to exercise due care. As a practical matter, of course, only individuals can take actions that violate laws, rules, and standards. But under our current rules, the PCAOB cannot discipline negligent auditors whose direct and substantial contributions furthered an audit firm's violations. In other words, an audit firm could be held liable for negligent acts, but the people contributing to the liability could only be held liable if they were reckless, a result that is anomalous at best. So today's action will close that oversight gap, thus emphasizing the obligation under our ethics rules that an auditor act with reasonable care and competence. Finally, it is important to recognize that the change in this ethics rule is not intended to encompass good faith errors in judgment. In conclusion, this is an incremental but important change in Rule 3502, and I support its adoption. Before I close, I would like to thank the staff who've contributed to the project. From the Office of the General Counsel, Connor Rosso, Drew Dropkin, Damon Andrews, and Vince Meehan. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, Rasan Inget, Tasneem Rehan, John Cook, Shana Vereen, and Federico Garcia. And from the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, Mike Davis, John Abel, and Bill Ryan. Thank you. I have no further comments.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I support amending PCAOB Rule 3502 to strengthen the board's ability to hold associated persons accountable for misconduct. While Rule 3502 was adopted in 2005, the rule codified certain ethical obligations of associated person. The rule sets forth a recklessness standard of liability for associated persons who directly and substantially contribute to a firm's violation. We have had a considerable amount of time to assess the rule's efficacy in advancing investor protection and driving audit quality. During this time, we have observed certain anomalous results in our enforcement regimen relating to holding associated persons accountable. Specifically, we have observed instances where a firm is charged for acting negligently, yet persons who directly and substantially contributed to the violations are not charged under Rule 3502 if their conduct is not deemed to meet the recklessness standard. Thus, the board may sanction a firm, but is constrained with respect to the associated person or persons who contribute to the firm's violative conduct. We well know that both recklessness and conduct and negligent conduct can lead to investor harm. Investor confidence in the reliability of financial statements is shaken when auditors fail to be effective gatekeepers, when they fail to faithfully execute their roles and responsibilities under PCAOB rules and standards. While there are circumstances on which it is appropriate to hold only an entity accountable for violations of PCAOB rules and standards, there are other circumstances where when certain persons play such a significant role in the conduct resulting in a firm's violations, that such persons also should be held accountable. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act granted the PCAOB authority to hold firms and associated persons accountable for negligent misconduct. As such, accountability under the PCAOB's enforcement regimen should be possible when the misconduct of associated persons, not just firms, meets the negligence threshold. With that in mind, it is important that we recalibrate Rule 3502 in the interest of investor protection and to encourage associated persons to execute their roles with due professional care and competence. I am cognizant that auditors often are required to execute extensive and complicated procedures to amass audit evidence in order to conclude that it is sufficient and appropriate to support their audit opinions. As such, the amendment to Rule 3502 is not intended as a means to second guess auditors' good faith judgments, which was a commenter's concern. The rule continues to pertain to associated persons who directly and substantially contribute to a firm's violation. This amendment is not a gotcha tool. It is designed to close a gap in accountability in our enforcement regimen. As discussed in the release, we do not anticipate that this rule would drive a tremendous surge in new Rule 3502 charges. The amendment to Rule 3502 would strengthen our enforcement authority by providing another tool whereby we can advance investor protection and elevate audit quality by holding negligent actors accountable for unreasonable conduct. The board remains judicious about how it utilizes enforcement resources and will pursue cases that it believes effectively drive deterrence. Importantly, being subject to a negligent standard to violative contributory conduct is not a new construct for auditors. The SEC has had the ability to apply this standard to auditor misconduct for years. This amendment merely solidifies that the PCAOB also may bring disciplinary action under a negligence framework. Compliance with the PCAOB rules and standard is crucial to the right functioning of our capital markets. Investors take comfort in the reasonable assurance that auditors provide that financial statements are free of material misstatement. Auditors who negligently fail to fulfill their responsibilities with fidelity fail investors. The PCAOB was established to stand in the gap and protect investors. The action that we will take today is a furtherance of that mission. Notably, this amendment reflects our consideration of comments that we received from cross-section of stakeholders. As such, I want to express my gratitude to commenters for engaging in the rulemaking process and providing thoughtful and incisive viewpoints. As I draw to a close, I want to acknowledge concerns raised that the amendment would adversely impact the pipeline of audit professionals. The position that the regulatory environment is driving talent away from the profession, I believe, is unproven. The competition for talent in the current labor market is fierce and has impacted many professions. Based upon my engagement with college and university students and faculty, the talent crisis in the audit profession is a multidimensional challenge. It is driven by, among other things, starting salaries compared to other professions, the lack of diversity, the 150-hour CPA credit requirement, considerable workloads, and an overall decline in the number of college graduates. The pipeline challenge is significant, and a sea change is needed. Attracting new talent to the audit profession will require commitment from various stakeholders, including firms, academics, and regulators who can educate today's talent pool about the fundamental function and critical importance of the profession in our capital markets. Auditors are essential gatekeepers, and students should be able to see that this profession is essential and can be rewarding. The PCAOB's role as a regulator, whether we are modernizing standards or striving to deter misconduct, helps ensure that the value and luster of the profession can be preserved. In closing, I would like to thank the dedicated staff from across the PCAOB for their thoughtful contributions, keen insights, and steadfast attention to this project. Specifically, from the Office of General Counsel, my sincere thanks to James Capoli, Connor Rasso, Drew Dropkin, Damon Andrews, and Vince Meehan. From the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, my sincere thanks to Martin Schmaltz, Rasheen Inget, Tashim Rahan, John Cook, Sheena Vereen, and Frederico Garcia. From the Division of Enforcement and Investigations, my sincere thanks to Bob Rice, Mike Davis, John Abel, and Bill Ryan. Additionally, I would like to thank my fellow board members and my staff for their contributions to this process and project. And finally, I would also like to thank the staff in the SEC's Office of Chief Accountant for their assistance with this project as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Bodick, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you again, Chair Williams. I support this recommendation. After careful consideration, I believe that this rule amendment will serve to protect investors while designed to minimize potential drawbacks. Since becoming a board member, I have emphasized in many of my remarks that the auditing profession is vibrant, resilient, and noble, and I'm privileged to count myself a member of it. As a profession, we hold ourselves to high standards, and rightfully so. At its core, the value that the auditing profession provides to the capital markets is trust. Any act that impairs this trust does not operate in isolation. It ultimately undermines the value of the profession. This cannot be taken lightly. Acts that discredit the profession do disservice to us all and call audit quality into question. The PCAOB's enforcement program's guiding principle is the protection of investors. Enforcement actions hold auditors accountable and operate as a deterrent. This amendment aligns with those goals. It will allow us to better hold accountable associated persons who directly and substantially contribute to their firm's violations. This rule applies when those persons act or fail to act in such a way, in the language of the rule, they knew or should have known would contribute to such violation. This is the new language before us today. It is short and it is clear. By focusing associated persons more on the duties they must uphold, this amendment will protect investors and will promote ethical behavior and ultimately help to ensure the profession maintains its vital position of trust. This amendment's other main advantage is that it makes our enforcement provisions more internally consistent and more consistent with those of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, as the staff detailed in their presentation. The amended rule offers additional deterrence without subjecting auditors to any new or different standard to govern their conduct in light of the SEC's authority. Such consistency is particularly important because it allows for clearer understanding about how rules and standards will be enforced. Rules that are clear are more equitable because they put all auditors on equal footing to understand and integrate them into their operations. As I reflected on the many comment letters submitted, it is clear the proposal has raised concerns. I acknowledge these concerns and was reassured by the release's lengthy discussion of those comments. Ultimately, the board is not adopting a negligence standard for the purpose of facilitating an increase in penalties. Rather, the board is adopting a negligence standard to facilitate increased accountability and deterrence. As the release states, accountability frequently improves outcomes. The release underscores how the rule is amended is tailored to serve its purpose. This has been done primarily through the retention of the requirement that misconduct must be directly and substantially contributing to the underlying violation. I believe this requirement is an important and appropriate limitation to make sure that culpable misconduct remains the focus. Furthermore, the release specifically states that the amendment does not target mere errors in judgment, but rather unreasonable conduct. This should minimize certain unintended consequences raised by commenters. Similarly, the release discusses how the interaction of the PCAOB and the SEC enforcement activities was considered to avoid needless duplication and meet the needs of each organization's program in the ultimate protection of investors. In other words, the rule aims to strike the right balance in the context of that larger enforcement framework. I'm grateful for those commenters who took the time and effort to contribute their views by submitting comment letters. The recommendation has been updated in response to that input, most notably by removing the proposed language that would have allowed an associated person to be liable for contributing to a violation by any registered firm, not just the firm they are associated with. I appreciate the staff's thoughtful consideration exhibited on this and other important questions raised by commenters. Now, let me end where I began, with trust in the profession. Nothing is more important than ensuring that trust remains intact. Even a small contribution to that cause is worthy. Finally, my thanks to staff for all their hard work on this project and in particular their diligence in meeting with me to address my questions. I extend my gratitude to the staff of the Office of the General Counsel, the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, and the Division of Enforcement and Investigations. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there are any further discussions from the board, I will now call for a vote on the staff recommendation. Board Member Ho.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Stein.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Thompson.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Board Member Bodick.
I support the recommendation as well.
Thank you. I also support the recommendation. All votes are unanimous. The recommendation is approved. That concludes the PCAOB's open meeting for today. As there is no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect from the webcast and teleconference.